The young people want to be heard. We're the future and we're who's going to be voting in 2 years, so they need to listen.
My granddaughter, I don't know if she will see them all.
The evidence, the scientific evidence is compelling and sobering.
The Earth's going to survive. It survived worse than the human race, but it may just wipe us out in the process.
Let's do it. My name is Craig Leeson. I'm a filmmaker and I've travelled all over the world filming the most critical issue, climate change.
That's as far out of my comfort zone as I can possibly go.
My good mate Malcolm, an entrepreneur, wants to show me what he thinks is a global problem. How climate change is affecting the environment he loves.
Epic.
Game time. This is gonna be awesome.
Dave Turner will be overseeing my training. He has hands-on experience all around the world.
If you really want to get an in-depth look at climate change and how it's affecting the loss of the glacial ice, you really should come with us.
How far do you push it? How far do you know to push it?
God, my legs are shaking so much.
I'm rattled. I'm worried.
Look at the avalanche.
The mountain looks completely destabilized to me.
Today there was another guide that was killed because of the soft snow.
In the future, with the climate warming, the glacier could become unstable and threaten the inhabitants of the valley.
The data are telling us that climate is changing, and it's actually changing very quickly.
To hear the world's top ice scientists tell us they're seeing it in almost every instance on every glacier, that has extremely worrying consequences for millions of people on the planet.
It's pretty cool when you think about our little pinpoint on the map. That's to fly paragliders on. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
I hope that we can honour his memory through the film.
There's too much turbulence.
Antarctica is losing about the mass of the Titanic every 10 seconds in ice, and that's going straight into the ocean and raising sea level.
We are in the midst of a bushfire crisis, the likes of which this state has never seen.
Go, go, go.
How can we, as our responsibility to this planet, not do something for the future generations?
My biggest fear is that once we pass a certain point, then there's no going back.
This is it. It doesn't get much better than the power of the voice of youth.
How do we save the glacier?
Looking back at something that's about to disappear and destroy a whole bunch of lives.
This is code red. There are no more chances. If we don't tackle this situation right now, we will not have a future. It's as simple as that.
Well, we want to welcome everybody from all around the world on today's discussion. We're excited to have the filmmakers behind the Last Glaciers. You know, it's kind of shocking that I was just watching that, and every time I watch that film, I really just sends a chill down my spine about what we're facing, the fragility of the natural world, and the current state that we're battling with natural change and weather change. And the first time I saw Craig's first movie and Matt, they've all worked together on The Plastic Ocean, which is really one of those first movies that kind of woke you up to the whole thing. And now they spent the last 4 years, where we'd like to bring them all on here and welcome them. Let's start off with Craig Leeson. He's the director, executive producer, and director. Craig, welcome. How are you doing today?
Good. Good morning. Good afternoon. Where you are?
Good. Where are you calling in from? You're in post-production right now, correct?
No, I just finished at the weekend, actually, and I'm in the north of England right now. So we were doing post-production in Glasgow, which has been the centre of finalising the film for the past 6 months.
Great. Well, also I'd like to introduce Malcolm Wood, the producer as well on the film, and the adventurer, who is one of the driving forces behind this. Hi, Malcolm.
Hey, Darren, how you doing?
Great, great. And where are you calling in from?
Chamonix, France, actually.
France. Oh, it looks like you're ready to go out and start another ski exhibition.
Yeah, I mean, it's the weather has been absolutely crazy here. It's I've been stuck here since lockdown, and it's been really interesting being able to see all 4 seasons in the mountains here in Europe, and actually how strange the weather is. And there's been a meter of snow over the weekend, and people are skiing, literally, you know, ski touring and playing in the mountains, and it's very, very unusual for this time of year.
Well, we're in Hong Kong, and we just have rain and heat here. So with that, Matt, I'd like to introduce Matt, also the co-producer on the film. Hello, Matt.
Hi there. How are you?
I think you're in Hong Kong, correct?
That's right. Yeah, calling in from Hong Kong. Finally, the sun's come out, so after a very wet day.
Perfect, perfect. And finally, Katrina Razon, the executive producer. Hi, Katrina.
Hello.
Good. Well, let's thank you all for taking the time to be with us here. We want to definitely take questions throughout the audience. With everybody in the audience, feel free to put the questions. We're going to integrate them and really have an interactive conversation kicking the whole thing off. So with this, where did the genesis of The Last Glacier start? I mean, the very beginning ideas, and how did this movie begin, Malcolm?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting story. Craig was watching a sustainability conference, and there was a gentleman called Jerome, who's a scientist from the Grenoble Glaciologist Institute in France. And, you know, it blew Craig away, what he saw and how this guy had taken the science and portrayed it in a very simple way that the general audience could understand. And he he found out that we were going on an expedition into the French Alps to do some extreme sports training, and he wanted to tag along to that trip. And when we got here, it was the driest December on record in the French Alps, and we were blown away by this extreme weather that was going on. And so we went and visited Jerome in his institute to learn more, and that kind of just rolled into a 4-year journey of discovering more and more about the film. And initially we chose the subject matter of glaciers because we wanted to easily show children that climate change was real, and it was an easy way for everyone to understand that this was happening around the world. Little did we know, and it's something that we discovered throughout the journey, the significance of what losing glaciers means to humanity and populations around the world. And that discovery is kind of the journey of the film.
And Craig, how did you come into this? And I guess you've worked with everybody before. So how did it kind of kick off within that?
Yeah, well, I brought Malcolm and Matt on board with the Foundation for a Plastic Ocean because I thought that with their industry background in the food and beverage industry, that there was some real changes they could make in terms of influencing how single-use plastics were being used in that industry. And they were very instrumental in helping craft the story in post-production, some of the changes we made towards the end of that project that looked at solutions within that film. And so as Malcolm mentioned, when I was doing a talk on single-use plastics in Hong Kong and met Jerome, and it was the first time that I'd ever heard anybody explain simply the facts behind climate change. And up until that point, I didn't know a lot about it. And what Jerome told the audience was that there were a group of scientists around the world involved with what's called the Ice Memory Project. And the Ice Memory Project is a project where they extract core samples from glaciers all around the world, and they analyze the frozen bubbles within these core samples, which tell them pretty much what the atmosphere was like going back 1 million years. And what they found was that during the 8 ice ages of that time, there was this natural oscillation of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and it just naturally oscillated as the Earth wobbled on its elliptical orbit around the sun. But what happened with the Industrial Revolution was that natural oscillation just went into a hockey stick 160 years ago as we started to burn fossil fuels. And the temperature also spiked. And it was the first time that that science had ever been explained to me in a way that I understood the facts that were not disputable. And I couldn't understand why that story hadn't been told in that way to everybody, and why it wasn't being taught in schools, and why political leaders weren't armed with that kind of knowledge. And so that was the impetus to look more deeply into how to turn that science into something that everybody could understand, which led to this trip with Malcolm and understanding what was happening in the mountains in France. And like a plastic ocean, the further down the track we went seeking answers to our questions, the more questions we were confronted with. And so it took that long because it took us that long for us to film the answers and to be able to present a case within the film that we think is just irrefutable in terms of the problems that's happening on the planet. And the glaciers were very much a visual tool for us to tell the story of climate change.
And I think, Katrina, then you joined actually once the filming was done, and this was a very important cause and important central issue for you as well, right? What was your role, and how did you become involved?
Well, I've always had this passion to change consumers' mindsets and businesses, because my theory is that you can change consumer habits if you go into the businesses itself. So I'm an investor, and I only back companies that take a net positive approach to their business. And I heard about what Craig and Malcolm were doing with this film and had been a big fan of A Plastic Ocean, which came out previously. And I always just want to get involved with anything that tries to raise awareness and to change the collective consciousness to protect our planet and our future in it.
Okay, and finally, Matt, I know you and Malcolm are business partners on a lot of ventures and sustainable ventures. What's brought you into this film, and what's your exact role?
So I'm also a producer, and as you mentioned, I've been working with Mal for over 20 years, and worked very closely with Craig on a Plastic Ocean. So I think that this one, I wasn't on the physical journey that Craig and Malcolm undertook in the mountains, which I have to admit I'm actually thankful for. But I managed to sidestep that one. But very much in terms of the thinking, I think what Craig, a lot of people don't know this, but Craig, when he was young, he was in Tasmania, and when Craig sees an injustice, he doesn't stop until he works out what's going on. And I don't remember the exact story, but there was a chemical spill in the water, and he he had to work it out, and he revealed to the local population that this company was at fault and that they had to address it. And I think ever since those days, his investigative nature has just taken him from one cause to the next. And we met and got very involved when he committed a significant portion of his life to plastics. And you know, for us, it hit me and Mal like through the heart, because he showed us that we were eating plastic when we ate fish. And now we discover that, you know, a third of all edible food goes uneaten, right? There's 6.5 garbage trucks of food per second being thrown away around the planet. And this is all linked into climate change and to a broken system. And so it feels almost like Craig opened Pandora's box, and we just are on the journey with him, where he keeps revealing more truth to us, and we keep having to work out how to communicate that, because it just feels very, very important. And then that's kind of brought us to here.
I remember, Craig, when your first talk that I met you, that was what you were saying. It's not about plastic in the oceans, it's about our health. You know, the microplastics that we're ingesting with the fish and ingesting within all of this, right?
Yeah, well, that was, you know, that's where that project moved from being a marine environmental documentary, which is how it started, to becoming a human health story, because ultimately that's what we found out, was we were corrupting our food chain. And in many ways, the Last Glaciers has been a very similar journey for Malcolm and I, because it's made us realize that this isn't just about glaciers melting. This is about, you know, in the Himalayas, for example, 2 billion people being impacted and starting to be impacted already because of the loss of ice. And the Himalayas have lost up to between 15 and 25% of its water since the 70s. And if we keep going the way we are going and burning fossil fuels, the models predict that the Himalayas will have lost 2/3 of their ice by the end of the century. And when you're confronted with those kinds of facts, it's shocking. And when we talk to scientists, some who say to us, we don't think that the human species will be around in another 50 years if we keep going on this trajectory, it's quite shocking. And so you realize that that we're corrupting our own systems again, like we did and have done with the food system with single-use plastics. This is actually affecting our ability to survive on the planet. And this isn't about saving planet Earth. And that's one message I think that we try and get through. The planet will survive. It will go on with or without us. It's about whether we want to maintain our own health as a species on the planet by preserving the life support systems we need to keep living on this planet. And that's pretty much the fundamental message, I think, in the film.
But even coming on the call today, we were talking about, well, it depends upon what media source you're listening to. You know, it's like, oh, apparently we've got nothing to worry about on this media source, and it's a hoax, and climate change is not real. So what have you guys learned in just going through this process, talking with the scientists to combat that says, yeah, this is all a hoax?
I think, Darren, like when Craig and I first sat down and had this discussion, so we're sitting in the Alps and we're confronted with what he just learned off Jerome, the driest December, and we were debating with people that we were with whether or not climate change was real and whether it was a big deal. And this is 4 years ago. I think the tide's changed. I think that there's a lot more momentum. I think more people now are, you know, agree that this is our biggest problem. But 4 years ago, they didn't. And the mission statement that Craig and myself wanted was to put an end to the debate. And that's why we chose glaciers as a subject matter, because they're thermometers around the world. The high mountains in every country indicate the warming that's happening and the more extreme weather. And you can track this, and it's a tangible thing you can measure, and you cannot argue it. As Craig said, we actually got revealed and learned during this journey what it actually means to lose glaciers. And the impact will be one of the biggest fallouts of climate change. And that will be the loss of water, around the world for over a third of the world's population. And that's a huge number of people that are going to be displaced. So, you know, I think I'm quite hopeful that there are more people today behind the movement than 4 years ago. And I think that they just need the information, they need the catalyst to be able to drive that change forward. And I hope, you know, films like ours helps us do that.
Katrina, what's your perspective on this?
You know, I think with the whole world in lockdown, it forced a lot of people to think and a lot of people to ponder about life in this planet. And the fact that a lot of people around the world realize that our leaders are incapable of leading. And the fact that there are children who are fighting for their futures is enough to realize that we need to all get our act together and elect lawmakers who will fight for climate action and for all of the social injustices in the world, because they are interconnected. And I just think it's time to put more pressure on our leaders around the world that this is a serious issue. And the warning signs are all there. Were there warning signs for the pandemic? Would we have been more prepared if there were warning signs? I mean, this is a matter of urgency before we face the turmoil of climate refugees and many more problems that will come with that.
And then Matt, obviously Malcolm likes to go around on all these crazy adventures. He's the adventure, climbing mountains, jumping off mountains, paragliding. It's interesting that you guys have this unique partnership that allows him to do these ones. And how come you didn't go on this adventure instead of with them? You decided to man the fort from here?
Well, actually, we both learned to paraglide together. So we both willingly threw ourselves off a small rock face in Hong Kong. Malcolm was definitely immediately more adept at it than me. So without a shadow of doubt. Malcolm's and my friendship, partnership, brotherhood, that what makes it work is that we enable each other's passions. So, we've created an entity that does multiple things which all intertwine in each other. So whether we're working on restaurants, it weaves into the sustainability that we're learning. Whether it's creating content, that feeds back into the way we're doing advertising. It all interweaves. And I think because we're creative minds and we're highly kind of energetic in the way we want to do things, if we felt restricted, it doesn't really work for us. And so we have enabled each other to run at each other's latest passions. And so, I mean, Mal has left me to run at nanotechnology and wellness for the last 2 years, while he's been working on improving the most insane paragliding skills and rock climbing and film production and everything else like that. So it's actually the beauty of our friendship that has enabled us to be able to act like this. And I think that enables us to do what we do. What I was going to add to your question was, I think one of the things we learned from doing Plastic Ocean, and we talked about how do we understand this, was that actually nobody particularly wants to go and sit down and watch 90 minutes about some climate issue. And also, the people that do want to do that already know there's a problem, right? So we needed to find a way to create a storyline, to create a discovery, an exploration, to get people on a journey, to get people's buy-in. And then on that journey, they're now on a story, they're on a journey, they then learn and pick up these salient, important points. And then we land them at the end with a call to action, that lights 1,000 fuses of people that will go and do amazing things with that revelation, with that learning. That was the formula that we identified from a Plastic Ocean. And with this one, it's even more that, because the human story, the journey to get to this, you cannot take a more honest voice than an adventure sportsman. Like, have you ever met a surf instructor, a paraglider who isn't just one of the most honest humans on the planet? You know, like this isn't a celebrity, this isn't a politician, this is someone who commits their life to knowing every inch of that rock, every whiff of air. They know that place at the back of their hand. When they tell you something, there's a real degree of honesty in that. And I think that capturing that and going on this journey where Craig, I have hats off to him for his bravery. Malcolm, just never-endingly pushing to find the ultimate angle, to go to the furthest point, to push your body beyond any possible limit. It's an amazing story, and I think that's also really important, because at the end of the day, this is entertainment, but it's also got to have a message, and I think that was what was a big part of it.
I mean, I think that's very important, adding story elements to this. And Craig, well, let's get to the story and the filming of this. Craig, were you experienced in this type of paragliding, mountain climbing, and let alone carrying a film? What was that like to get you into this?
Not only was I not experienced, but the thought of doing any of those sports absolutely terrified me. I had a very profound fear of heights ever since I was a child. So we thought that would be an element within the storytelling that we could bring along, that is a kind of an analogy about the challenges that we face with climate change, is sort of the personal challenge that I had to face. In order to get into these glaciers and film them, I needed to confront my fears on climbing and paragliding and all these things. And that's where Malcolm came in to train me. And first of all, he had to believe in me and believe that I could do this. And so it's the journey between our friendship and how he prepares me for that, and how he then ultimately gets me to engage in these sports and become, semi-proficient in some of them, where we're able to get into these high mountain environments, taking very heavy cinematic cameras and filming what many people are unable to film, purely because of the equipment we're using and the way that we're able to get this equipment into these very high mountain environments.
Malcolm, you said your goal was you just wanted to scare the living daylights out of him at the start of this.
That was definitely one of my main goals, and I think I achieved it. But unfortunately, I also scared the living crap out of myself as well with some of these things. And there's this moment in the film where Dave is the expedition leader. He's got much more experience than I do in the mountains, and you always have to rely on, it's a buddy system or a partnership or a mentor to look after you. And on our Peru expedition, he got into a motorbike accident and ripped his calf muscle out and had 50 stitches, so he couldn't join us, and he was supposed to tandem fly Craig off. And I had very low hours on a tandem paraglider, let alone the fact that the objective we chose, not many people in the world have ever paraglided from that altitude, let alone with a tandem. And even for Dave, it was an altitude he had never taken off at. And we were going to land at an altitude that no one had ever, in the team had never landed at either. And that probably was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. And when you watch the film, you can see how elated we are for what happens.
But didn't that take you 2 days, actually? Craig, didn't you mention how difficult this was because you had planned it out to do it on one day track?
Yeah, well, these summiting a 5,800 meter peak is a difficult task in itself. And, most climbers, you go up the mountain and hopefully you're able to summit if the weather's good and your planning's been great and your fitness is there. We planned to go up, to not only summit the mountain, but also rig the cameras, fly off the mountain and film the glaciers using the paragliders. That's one of the points in the film, that we use the paragliders, is to get this unique perspective of glaciers that very few people have filmed before, and film them before they disappear. So we did that, and it was planned out to every calorie almost, in terms of the energy we were burning. But the first morning we got up the mountain and summited very successfully, which was fantastic. That was a great achievement. That was the highest I'd ever climbed a mountain. and we laid the paraglider out, getting ready, preparing to fly, but the wind gusts were right on the limit. And I looked at Malcolm and I said, mate, you know, this is you're the pilot. You call this and make the decision. And there was a lot of pressure on Malcolm to fly because we had the cameras out. We'd spent a lot of money, a lot of time and energy getting into Peru, getting to that one point in the film story where we were going to do something remarkable. And to his credit, despite our cameraman pushing him to launch, he said it's not safe enough, and the risk assessment is that we're better off walking off the mountain. And that took a lot of courage, and I respect him to this day for making that decision because it was the right decision. So we walked back down the mountain, and you know, that took another 6-8 hours to get off the mountain. And by the time we got down there, I was physically wrecked, absolutely exhausted with just that achievement of getting all the equipment and myself up onto that mountain. 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock on the tent from our expedition leader, and he said the wind's dropped. I could hear this voice going, the wind's dropped. And I could hear Malcolm kind of groaning, going, oh no. And he looked at me and he said, do you have any energy left to get back up the mountain and do it again? And I said, but we don't have any food left. And, you know, we've got nothing to eat. And Cody, our cinematographer, who's just always was gung-ho about doing everything, he was like, yes, let's do it. It's a beautiful morning. We can do it. We can do this. And it was the hardest thing I think I've ever done, was actually at that point was drag myself out of that very warm tent where I was very sleepy and exhausted, put on all that cold gear again and start the journey back up the mountain. It was just, it took me 20 to 30 minutes before I could even engage my legs properly with my brain and get moving before we hit the ice and started climbing up the ice. And so we got to the takeoff point again, and we were a bit earlier in the morning, and the wind was really, really good. But there was, every 3 minutes, there was this cycle of gusts coming up the mountain, and there was a cliff. We had this takeoff launch zone of this jagged ice that went for about 30 meters, and then a 2,500 meter straight drop over the cliff to the next level on the mountain. So we had to make sure we got off. I mean, if we tripped or we got caught in a gust and blown over, we were just going to fall over the side of that cliff. And this time Malcolm looked at me and said, you make the decision this time, do you want to go? And I said to him, I honestly don't have the energy to climb back off this mountain. He said, the only way you're going to get me off this mountain is to fly me off. And so it was, you know, it was a bit of a joke, but there was some truth to that, where we'd burnt everything we had. And so we made the decision rightly at that point to launch off the mountain. But and you'll see it in the movie, and we won't give too much away about what happened, but yeah, the flight didn't go according to plan.
Malcolm, what's going through your mind? I mean, all this pressure's on you. You're new to this as well in the tandem, as you said. You know, what's that point that's changing your perspective on it to decide go, no go? What were those elements that hit home for you to make that first decision, and then secondly, give it back to Craig and say, okay, let's do this?
I mean, paragliding is a weird sport because it's, you know, they have a saying that you have to be stupid enough to let your feet leave the ground, but you have to be smart enough to get your feet to go back down. And often and not, you learn by having pretty traumatic accidents in a paraglider where it just collapses and you fall down, and it can scar you. And it happened a few times previously to me. And I said to myself, I will never let anyone else pressure me into making a decision I don't want to do. So the first time I said no was I genuinely thought it was the wrong decision to go into the air, and I would risk both of our lives unnecessarily. The second decision-making process was that it was actually more dangerous for Craig to attempt to go off a 6,000 meter peak than for me to fly him off. And because we'd pushed ourselves so hard to go up the second time, we were kind of more in survival mode. We actually lost 6 pounds of weight each within a 3 or 4 day period because of the lack of food, because the expedition was only planned for one summit push, and we all got food poisoning as well on the way up. So we were in a very weakened state. Everyone had problems with their guts. We woke up on the second day having not had dinner. So that night we didn't have dinner, we didn't eat breakfast, and we didn't have lunch. And so we went 24 hours climbing it the second time. It just felt right, but the danger was that Craig would trip on this jagged ice, and if he tripped, he would pull us both off the cliff. So I just remember the last thing I said to Craig was, you run, but you run for real, and we're gonna go. And the rest is history.
I can't even believe it. I mean, that's just pushing your boundaries behind that. We have this question from the audience that said, Craig, you're facing that, you had a fear of heights. How did you overcome that fear of heights? And then how did that actually have you overcome your fear of heights?
Yeah, you never overcome your fear of heights. And it wasn't till well into the filming that I found out that Malcolm has a fear of heights. And what he taught me actually is that you manage that fear, and it's how you manage yourself that actually matters. And when you're hanging or standing on a ridge that's a foot across, and you're looking down either side of a 2,000 meter drop, and your body freezes, as mine did on many occasions, you've got two choices. You either take control of your mind, and you take control of your thoughts, and you push on and get off that ridge, or you create a problem and call a helicopter, or something worse happens. So it's my fear of heights hasn't dissipated. It's still there. I just know that now I'm more capable of doing those sports, and that with proper risk assessment, the risks are actually low. And armed with that knowledge, you make the mental decision to go on with the task at hand.
I give you credit, because I'm not sure. I guess when you get pushed to the brink, you have to make that right choice for yourself, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not something that for everybody, and not something that everybody can do. I personally, I enjoy challenges. I enjoy working with other people who have different skill sets to me, and that can teach me something new. And I learned so much, not only just about the sport of para-alpinism, but also about teamwork, buddy systems, the importance of relying on other people, and actually having the confidence to allow other people to make decisions that are life or death decisions on your behalf, because they have a greater ability to do that. So for me, the journey was a great challenge, and also a great learning curve. And that was matched by the awareness that I think both Malcolm and I came to understand about the critical situation with climate change as well. And I think those parallel story threads kind of run side by side throughout the film.
Matt, you're weren't there at that point. Did you know what was going on? What was your reaction to all of this happening? And obviously you've known them and been great friends and brothers for so long. What's going in your mind when this is such a challenging point in time?
I mean, ever since I've known Malcolm, I've always hoped to be able to stay alive. So I've kind of gotten quite used to the fact that he's always walking along that line. And it's funny enough, I recently got asked that question. They said, like, do you worry about Malcolm? And I said to myself, I said, well, I don't, because I know that he's, as much as he loves walking down the line, he does it with 3 ropes. And so he's actually very good at risk analysis. And so he's pushing the risk, but he's also making sure that he's trying to cover his bases as best he can. But I also have sort of accepted that, you know, going to live to the max, and so you just got, I think you never want to see someone not do what they're meant to do, you know. And so I think, but Craig's a different story. I was worried about him every time he was with Malcolm, so that's and I'm just glad that he's back in one piece.
Craig, is there something that you want to tell Malcolm now? You finished the film, everything's now posted. What do you want to say to Malcolm that you haven't said to Malcolm? And I'm going to ask Malcolm the same question back.
I don't think I'll ever be able to sleep in a tent with another human being and be able to deal with the sorts of things that one does at that altitude. It's, you know, the thing about being in the mountains is you really do form strong bonds. And I think Malcolm and my friendship was tested to the limit, because we weren't taking these risks without reason. We were in these situations because we had a task to do, and that was, you know, my task was to film the glaciers before they disappear as a historical record, and also to be able to tell this story. Malcolm's job was to get me into the mountains to do that, and make sure that he got me home safely. So, you know, we don't always agree on the way forward with many things, but I think the bonds that you form because you rely on each other so much in the mountains was something that will be everlasting for me. And I actually say in the film, after we climb the Himalayas, that I finally understand why people do this. And that's because when you are on a 6,000 meter peak or above, you do really feel like you're standing on the shoulder of giants. And to be able to share that moment and that experience and having overcome a challenge like that is something that's incredibly special. And I think Malcolm and I wanted to get that feeling, that emotion through the film, because we want people to be able to empathize with you know, the local population, local people who live in these mountainous areas and who are affected by things like climate change, but also to understand why people who work in the mountains and climbers, why they go and do what they do. And I think that's a very important thread, another important thread in the film.
Malcolm?
Yeah, I mean, I mirror what Craig said. I mean, we went to Peru and we lost Dave Turner to an accident with his leg, and we had to work out how to do this expedition. And we unfortunately lost Cody to a paragliding accident as well through the film, and the film will be dedicated to him and his efforts as our director of photography. But by the time we got to the Himalayas, and it was 4 years of just, you know, brutal environments, really big physical challenges, overcoming massive fear, and also just the emotional roller coaster of learning all of these things. I mean, like talking to the head of NASA, who basically said, look, we're facing our extinction. Talking to the head of United Nations saying that this planet is going to be too hot to live on if we don't solve this problem this year. 2020 is our last year to solve this problem. By the time we got to the Himalayas, I mean, we were emotionally drained. We'd lost team members. We'd been given all of this burden of information that we wanted to document in the correct way and share it in the correct way. And it was just me and Craig left. And it was me and Craig having to climb a mountain, having gone from Craig having zero experience to now having to trust my life with him. And the last expedition, where we discover or, you know, illustrate to the audience that this is going to affect 2 billion people in this one location, the loss of ice. And we had to get ourselves up onto a ridge, a summit, Yala Peak, to shoot this decimated glacier on the other side. And Craig and me did it alone, and we did it by ourselves, and we did it trusting each other. And that's just something, that sequence of events over that 4 years to lead to that one moment in the film. I mean, it's almost hard to tell the audience how, you know, what you feel at that moment. you know, we gave each other a big hug. We sat down at 5,600 meters. We had a moment to reflect. And there wasn't much that we needed to say to each other, you know, and we just looked at this vast barren landscape with no ice on it. And I think I remember saying to myself, you've got to go above 6,000 meters now in the Himalayas to see ice. And it's just crazy. And that was kind of the really like the big powerful moment for me in the film.
And overall, with the whole group, what's any special moments that stand out to any of you that you took in personally that you'd also want to talk to the audience, and maybe any piece of advice that goes from what you've learned into what you might share with the audience?
Craig, I've got one.
Well, in the film, I say this. I come to this realization where we've just flown with NASA. We're the first documentary film team to fly with NASA over Antarctica, and we spent a week on 4 10-hour, 12-hour missions, flying in this great big DC-8 that's been retrofitted with lasers and gravitational equipment, where they can measure ice movement within 1 centimeter. So if the ice moves or melts within a centimeter, NASA knows about it. And, you know, we just heard from the lead scientist that, you know, if we don't change this problem, he doesn't think we'll be around as a species, because ice the size of 2 Titanics is melting out of Antarctica every 10 seconds. And we just sat down, and it dawned on me that, you know, about we take ourselves to be such intelligent creatures and such, you know, a dominant species, yet we're making very stupid decisions. And Malcolm said to me, like, you know, you've got to get that out. You've got to release that frustration. And he had the camera rolling with the crew, and I just downloaded, and I just said, this is code red. This is the last chance we have. And for me, it was just the frustration, I think, that we've been armed with this knowledge for so long. I mean, we had scientific consensus in the 80s, and to get scientific consensus on anything is a very difficult thing. But we've had it since the 80s that humans have been responsible for influencing the change in the climate. We've known that. The oil companies have known that. Political leaders have known that. But because of the value in the financial system of oil and gas and coal to the planet's economy, that's been ignored. Unfortunately, in the past, we haven't included the value of the environment in our economic calculations. And now we're being forced to do that as we're losing these environmental systems that we need, not only to provide the resources that we like and enjoy every day, but also to provide the life systems that we require to actually survive on planet Earth. And so I think that's the most important thing for me in the film is getting that frustration out and helping people understand that there is no time left, and we have to act now.
I understand that you guys took a different distribution model, looking at a different way to get it out to the audience. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the different way you looked at how you were going to fund and move forward in distributing the film. Katrina, Matt?
Matt?
Yeah, so firstly, I think what we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to make this film without having any particular pressure from any financial institution whatsoever. So it was very important that we were not tied to anybody in order to do that. And that meant that we actually funded it by all the people you can see on the screen today. And so we're not tied to any network, to any that could lead back to another news channel, to another opinion, to anything like that. It needed to be an unencumbered, free production so that we could do it to the best way that we see fit. Subsequently to that, we've actually used some quite innovative crowdfunding where we raised some money from the crowd, but actually every person that did it bought trees and helped further push the carbon footprint of which we've already balanced across anything that where we may have used carbon in the production of the film. We further have built more forests of trees through a service called the EcoMatcher, which is mentioned in the film because they're the first time that there is absolute transparency. So when you plant a tree, you actually can geotag exactly where that tree is, the name of the farmer who has planted that tree, and in fact, you could even go as far to name the tree if you wanted to. So, so we've enabled a forest of trees to be planted in the process of helping fund this film, and to generate awareness. And the next step from here is we're going to explore different distribution channels, but our primary goal is to try and get as many eyeballs onto it as possible. So it's not limiting it into one area. And there is lots of interesting approaches and I think Katrina rightly mentioned that. I think that with COVID and with people being at home more, and I think with just the general digitization of our world, in such as the use of Zoom as we're doing right now, I think that streaming is becoming a very powerful medium, and so we're gonna work collectively. Everyone on this webinar is gonna find the optimum means to get as many people watching this film.
I mean, just to add to that, I mean, Stefan's asked a question here. You know, who would we most want to see the film to do something differently as a result? I think that the strategy that we've taken is that by self-funding the film, we're not tied to a specific distributor currently, and we're open to make those decisions ourselves. So that's you know, a deliberate strategy, and we want as many people to see this as possible, and so that we have the ability to keep that negotiation open moving forward. For me, the thing that really worked well with the Plastic Ocean is it was a topic that kids related to. It was a film that kids could watch because you had the subject of animals and food and it could be very easily understood that plastic was damaging to us, the food chain, the environment. And so the kids would come home and say, "Mommy and Daddy, why are you still buying your shopping with a plastic bag?" And everyone wants to be a kid. Everyone wants to be a kid, but everyone wants to be a hero to their kids. And so the kids started to inspire the adults to change their habits. And so I think, you know, if I was to pick one audience that I want to see this film, it would be every kid. And the mission statement was to pick a subject matter that was easily understandable. And we wanted to have this sense of adventure to make it more engaging. And, you know, I hope that we can inspire the younger generation, because they're the ones being more proactive than we've ever been in our generation. They're taking to the streets, they're doing student protests, and they're trying to incite change. And they need to be armed with the correct information and empowered to help us change policy around the world.
Katrina, what's the key message that you think you want everybody to come out of this? Why did you invest into this? What's that key message that you want to see happen or change?
Well, I hope it inspires urgency, because this isn't a matter where we can just sit back and wait much longer. We need to demand lawmakers, we need to demand our leaders to take action, and we need to put that pressure on them now.
What about marketers? What advice do you give to marketers in their different positions and with brands and these key ones? What should they be doing, and what could you recommend for them? What type of quick actions can they be taking?
Well, for one, you know, 70% of global emissions come from 100 companies. And what I've noticed with those 100 companies is that they are greenwashing everybody from the Coca-Colas to the Unilevers, you know, and the consumers are not, you know, they're smarter than these corporations think. And I think now the consumers are demanding for more transparency. They're demanding for these corporations to actually, you know, just follow up with what they're promising and not taking advantage of people's ability to trust a company that is aligned with goodwill, the values, you know? So I think it's up to us to really demand from these corporations, from our leaders, for this change and lead with action. Like we're tired of all the talk.
I mean, Darren, just to add to that, and it's a really good point from Katrina, is, you know, 4 years ago, if you were marketing a business and you wanted to use a green strategy to save the planet and the environment, you were at risk of annoying 50% of the population that did not believe in it. Today, you don't have that issue. If you look at our restaurant business, 10 years ago, we were using single-use plastics. And then we were one of the first in Hong Kong to eliminate single-use plastics 5 years ago in the first wave with the release of a plastic ocean, because we had that knowledge. Today, if you have single-use plastic in your restaurant, the consumer doesn't want to go there. They'd rather go to a restaurant that doesn't have single-use plastic. And so I think we're at that tipping point where people are behind climate change. And if you offer them the products that support that change, they'll buy into it. Whereas you were at risk before, so risk it now, because you've got that. And if you're doing something that's bettering the planet and you're building a business model that's sustainable, you're going to get better loyalty from that customer base. And the time is now.
Greg?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to when we discussed this the last time I spoke with you, Darren, and your members with the Plastic Ocean, is the message to corporations that haven't made the turn is that young people do not want to engage in any product that will despoil the environment. They just don't want to be a part of that. They don't want to be a part of breaking down the environment. So if you're not already seeking alternative design with your products or building sustainability into your business, then you are going to become a legacy industry, because there are young entrepreneurs who are very eager and are doing that right now. And they're building businesses based on the fact that they have a loyal customer base who want to spend money with companies that do just that. So you're going to be left behind as a business if you're not already building that in. And if you're concerned about the extra cost, for example, of redesigning or using an alternative to a single-use plastic, or a product that doesn't involve the burning of fossil fuels or uses regenerative energy in its production, then you need to start looking at where you place the costs for these. Instead of saying that the price point at the front for this alternative product is too much, take some of that cost, that extra cost, and build it into the back end of your marketing, and start using that and market your company as being environmentally concerned or a sustainable company, and then use that money through the marketing to attract more customers, where it offsets the front end costs. And I think that if you're a company that's not doing that today, you're going to have problems surviving in the future, because the competition is simply going to take your spot.
Well, I think it's about action, and obviously we see what's happening around us, and the companies, the marketers, all have to be in that position to really take that. In the last 3 minutes of the session here, I want to just come back quickly to each of you and top up. If there's something that you've learned over this journey in making this film, what is that, and what advice can you give to other people from what you've learned? I'll start with Craig.
Choose your tent companions wisely. Because,
you know, I promised I wasn't going to bring that story up, but you know, you and Malcolm in a tent, you know, that's supposed to stay on the mountain.
You're going to learn things about that person that you probably didn't want to know before you started.
Malcolm.
I mean, on another interview about this topic, someone asked me, like, how do you stay positive with you know, how can with all this information and negativity and watching politicians use it against, you know, the population. Like, how do you stay positive? And I think throughout the journey, we had to constantly find strength to learn more negative news, strength to climb mountains, strength to go to another country, strength to continue the journey. And I think the biggest takeaway lesson I learned from this is, if you keep persisting on, you know, your idea or your project or your dream, you'll eventually get it done. And I think 4 years of filming with Craig was one of the biggest single projects I've ever taken on. And yeah, I think it comes down to his stubbornness and persistence, and mine as well. And obviously the support of Matt and Katrina. It's just been an amazing team to be able to work with.
Katrina, and
well, I think a lot of people around the world are feeling a sense of hopelessness on top of the pandemic and a lot of ecological grief. And it's important to always remember that there is always something bigger than you, that you could always help out, whether that is within your immediate community. You can volunteer, you can donate to a lot of conservancies around the world. There's always someone out there who needs your help, and there's always a way to lend your resources, your energy, your time into, you know, something that is bigger than you. And it's important to know that it's the only way we can deal with this ecological grief moving forward.
And finally, Matt.
I was actually going to mirror that. I was going to say, what did I learn from being part of the journey of making this film? And I think actually the thing that I learned is that I previously felt, I was fairly aware that climate change was around. I could see weather freaking. I read a lot. I could sense that there was something, you could see it, feel it, see it. But there was a great sense of helplessness that I didn't feel like I could actually get involved in it. I didn't think that I could make any form of difference personally, because it felt like, you know, everything you ever watch is some massive carbon sequestering program or some government doing this. But actually, I think the learning from really understanding and researching and trying to ensure that everything we've said is validated and correct is that individually, just understanding your own carbon footprint. Don't bank with a bank that supports petrochemical companies. Don't invest in firms that are not ethically sound. Don't look at the carbon footprint of what you eat. Maybe consider how much you eat, how often, how many days a week you need to eat meat if you're considering to do that. I think that understand that there's a big difference between something that is local and grass-fed and something that is out of this horrendous agri-food system that is causing us huge economic, social, and environmental issues, and that individual people can make a change, even if it's just in your own patterns of life, and that you shouldn't underestimate that. It felt much more simple to stop using a straw and to not buy bottled water, but in exactly the same way, you can make these other fundamental shifts that collectively will make a difference.
Well, that about has, it's about all the time we have today. We could talk about this for hours, but I'm really excited to see the film. Definitely have many more discussions with you all. I want to thank you all for taking the time. I know you've been really busy and getting the ready film and out there for us. So definitely, and all in the audience, you know, strength, that resilience, being able to take action, that individual action makes a difference. And sometimes it's hard to think that it does make a difference, but it makes a difference. So I'd like to thank you all. Thank everybody. Hello.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.